Hello, my name is Michael Kaplan, and I am here with two very dear friends of mine, Laurie Maston and Paul French. And Laurie and Paul are colleagues of mine. We were in different parts of the country and we work in different companies, but professionally, we have a very, very strong bond. All three of us are longtime members of the NACVA, of the National Association of Certified Valuators and Analysts. And this organization has meant a lot to me, and I know that Laurie and Paul feel the same way. We are here today, all three of us, representing the Thomas R. Porter Lifetime Achievement Award Council. And this was a council that we set up back in the year 2008 to recognize certain outstanding professionals, outstanding human beings who've made great contributions to the world, to our profession, to their families. And the council was set up in memory of a very dear friend of ours who I wish was up on the board with us today. His name was Tom Porter, and he was the guy who we all aspired to be when we grew up. I mean, he was the professional, very dedicated to all of those people around him. I mean, he was the guy who drove through a hurricane, roadblocks, and all kinds of other obstacles to get to Arlington, Virginia, because he and I were presenting a program and our guest attorneys weren't showing up. So Tom knew that he had to be there. Nothing stopped him. Also very dedicated to his family. And I mean, I could go on and on and on and tell you about Tom's life and the things that he did, but he was really at the top of the profession. Today we're here to talk about this year's recipient of the Thomas R. Porter Lifetime Achievement Award. And candidly, there is no one more deserving of this honor than Paul French. I remember back, it was many years ago, it was in the 90s, in the late 90s, I was at a conference, another organization's conference, where I was invited to be a speaker in the area of expert testimony. And when I came down from the stage after I was through speaking, I heard someone call my name. Michael Kaplan, is that you? And it was no one other than Paul French. And Paul pulled me aside and we started talking, and I know we went out to dinner and we went to that really great ice cream parlor. You remember that? It was on Cape Cod. And we talked, and one of the things that we talked about, Paul said that he heard me speak. I believe it was at a NACVA conference in 1996 on the topic of expert testimony. And that kind of piqued his interest in the world of litigation. And Paul refocused his practice to litigation and became one of the most esteemed experts in financial forensics in the country. I mean, he's the guy who walks into the courtroom, takes the witness stand, and when opposing counsel tries to challenge Paul's credentials and ask him about it, goes to the voir dire process, the judge will look down and say, counsel, you don't mean to tell me that you're challenging Mr. French's credentials. I mean, Paul has got it all. Paul has 14 credentials. And I know Laurie has more to say about that. Laurie has more to say about that. 14 credentials. And I mean, that's a lot. And I know you have more credentials because the only ones that you put on your CV and the only ones for which you will wear the ribbon are those that you had to take an exam in order to get. Those that were mere acknowledgements do not appear there. Am I correct, Paul?
Correct.
And not only does Paul have these credentials, but he's put them to good use in promoting our profession and taking it to all new highs. And I have to refer to my notes because I just want to comment on some of the professional positions that Paul has held. He was chairman of the executive advisory board of the NACVA, 2008, 2009. And if my recollection is correct, I think I nominated you for the chairmanship because I was the chairman immediately before you. And I remember your first meeting vividly, but I know Laurie has more to say about that. Chairman of the Texas Society of Certified Public Accountants Statewide Business Valuation Forensics and Litigation Services Committee. Chairman of the NACVA Litigation and the Litigation Forensics Board. Chairman of the ABAR Credentialing Examination Subcommittee of the NACVA. You were, wow, you got a lot of stuff here, Paul. I'm impressed. Primary author, one of the primary authors of the Converged Ethical, Professional, and Business Valuation Standards. I could go on and on and on, and it never ends. Not only did Paul approach the profession with a vengeance to do well for himself, but he's given back. He's given back an enormous amount over the years as a professional, as a leader, a true leader in the profession. I also want to say that Paul is a family man. I believe you've been married to Barbara. You and Barbara have been together for 50 or so years, more 51. Than 50 years?
Yes, sir.
51. There we go. I mean, that not only does that speak to Barbara's ability to put up with you, but certainly I know she would not settle for anything less than the best. And
it would have been a couple of years longer, but her mom wouldn't let us get married till she was 19.
Got it. Very good. Her mom was very wise. And I know that you've done so many things in the community. I know that for a period of time, your family had a farm and you learned how to repair all the farm equipment in the event that it would break down and no one would be there. I know you were very actively involved in the Scouts and in sailing. And I know that you love your grandson and you've passed your passions on to the next generation. I mean, you certainly have left a legacy here. And what I want to say, a couple of things I want to say, and then I'm going to pass the baton to Laurie because I've spoken for too long, but I have a lot to say because this is Paul. Number one, it is an honor and a privilege. It's my honor and privilege to be part of the presentation of the Thomas R. Porter Lifetime Achievement Award to you, Paul. That's the first thing I want to say. And the second thing I want to say is I love you, Guy. You are a great person, and I am a better person for having known you all of these years. Laurie.
Thank you, Michael. And Ibid, to what you just said, I am just a huge fan of Paul French and have loved him from the day that I met him. And I can't think of a more deserving recipient of this award than Paul. And, just to give you a little bit of background too, Paul and I have several overlapping layers of life. I was born and raised in Texas. He's out of Dallas. It's not where he was born and raised, but it's where he landed, chose to stay. And so he and I have some root connections too. I was raised on a farm, and I honestly think there's nothing that beats learning how to solve problems when it comes to the skills that you have in our profession. But he and I from a professional standpoint, our paths have crossed. I mean, he and I were both in the business valuation discussion group that was started and eventually shepherded and managed by Bob Samasi. And we had long exchanges, being members of that group. He and I both were involved in the creation of the NACVA's national course for the financial forensics back in 10, 12 years ago. And, there's been many a dinner that, Barbara has joined with us and many conversations, but our connections don't stop there. And I'm in some way reminding Paul of some of these too. He and I were both members of the National Litigation Consultants Review editorial board. And so we spent hours and hours on conference calls discussing technical aspects of articles, grammatical things, poking fun at each other when they were our own articles. And resulting from that, other things have happened. He and I were both, instructors for the MAFF program when it was the CFFA. And the things that I have learned from Paul can't be quantified. I mean, I've learned, grace and stature and what it means to help others and not ask for anything in response to it. Not that I've mastered that. I think Paul did a much better job than I have on that. But, I want to kind of get back to some of the influences that he's had. And one of them, and Michael, you mentioned it, was his influence on our professional standards. I mean, he was part of the task force that was joining and unifying the standards between the IBA and NACVA. And that was no easy task. I mean, it took him 2 years to get that through, and it wasn't until June of 2011, I believe, when those were memorialized in our NACVA IBA joint standards. And that in and of itself was something that he had hats made for. I remember that. But all of these things kind of lead to, he's just, part of his nature is that auditor, probably from early on in his career, kind of an explorer, but a master of what he does. You mentioned his credentials that he has, and he only puts the credentials up that he actually had to earn rather than pay for. But I have to say, one of the running jokes at conference has always been the length of the ribbon string that Paul would have coming down from his name tag, because he had, it's not just the credentials, but he served in so many ways to our profession. And from a standpoint of not asking for anything other than an opportunity to serve the professional community. And I kind of say it was kind of a, running joke about how long his ribbons would be, that, they would reach the floor. And Paul's not a short man. But I think it goes to, he's constantly seeking knowledge. And if there was a new credential, he wasn't adding it onto his list just so he would have longer ribbons or a bigger CV. He was doing it because he was investigating and wanting to master that knowledge and master that content. And so it wasn't really to get the credential, but it was to make sure that he knew what was going on, and he constantly learning, just a lifelong learner. Paul, I know, you were an Eagle Scout, and that character has held strong throughout your entire life. And I just have to say, I mean, I feel like I'm a fangirl, but I so admire you, and I so appreciate all of the things that you've done for us.
So the floor is yours, Paul.
I think that, as I told you, I thought so much of Tom. That day that you called me and asked me to pull over and told me of his passing. It's one of the toughest days of my life. But so I'm extremely honored to even be considered I think that to give credit where credit is due, you're absolutely right, Michael. I would not even have been testifying, and not for you. I certainly wouldn't have lasted at it, and you and Michael, or to Tom. And then I hooked up with Salty Schumann and Bill Stewart and Jerry Love and Daryl Durrell, all NACWA superstars who gave me time to answer my questions, but to help me grow and develop. and never let me down. After that, I started cold calling lawyers to develop the business base, and soon was able to connect with a fine bunch of lawyers that I will say are NACFA quality, and thought as much of the business as I did, and they worked with me and helped me with my reports and helped me with testifying and practicing with me. And just quickly mention it's Dr. Bob Gordon, John Frick, Marston Alexander, Janet Brumley, and George Parker, among many others. They're some of the top lawyers in Texas. And then finally, my work is not really my work. It's the work of my team. And my team was Barbara, my wife, until she retired. Misty Berman of 20 years, she's put up with me. Jason for 10 years, my partner, Brad Pollock, who was going to supersede me until he worked for me for 8 years, until a hedge fund came and doubled his salary. I lost him. And then finally, Janice Oden, who's been my assistant for 11 years and has done a fine job of doing research for us. So when you get down to it, it's not just my work, it's everybody's work. It's accumulation of what NACFA gave me and taught me. And I remember one of my very first cases, it was a very tough case. I was way over my head. I was scared to death. I was defending Aiken Gump, and you don't want to screw up if you're defending Aiken Gump in a multi-million-dollar lawsuit. That pretty much would cancel your career. And I made my report, and I called up Michael, and I said, Michael, I've got a report, and I tried to explain to him what was going on, and I sent it to him. He sent it to me, and I'll let you know what it's about. And he called me up that weekend and says, I have nothing to tell you except, boy, did you get them? I says, you got it. You understand. So that's,
Got you started.
you know, I owe everything to NACFA. And as far as your kind words, I just have no words to respond. And I would say that anybody that really has a desire to become qualified to do a good job and be able to raise their hand and say the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, this is the place to start. Anything else here?
I just think that you at this time could not have given him a greater gift. This means the world to him and to me, because I've watched for years, and I know Lori and I know Michael, and we've seen a lot. So I just thank you very much. And I thank NACFA for all they've done for us and for Paul.
And I should have mentioned Parnell in that conference that I came to, first saw you 96 or 95, Michael. I also went to the IBA conference, and I also went to the ASA conference to decide who I was going to go with. I said, I guess NACFA must be pretty good. And I did also join IBA because I had a heated discussion with Ray Miles, and I decided he was the type of guy I wanted to latch up with too. But yeah, so I've been NACFA since 1996. So
Thank you.
thank you. And thank Parnell.
We will.
Yeah, I have to say, Michael, one of the things that has always struck me about, Paul, and I shouldn't say direct that to Michael, but Paul, one of the things that's always struck me about you is that you have always been so willing to be humble about what you've done, even though you've just done amazing things, and, willing to do things like write little positive notes or comments about a conference or responding to an email, just in just freely, giving of yourself. And that is something that can't be learned.